When the need to learn becomes less important than the need to love, opening to a greater awareness can occur while you are still in your body or after you have let your body go.
There's something I'd like to have us take a look at. By now, most of you are familiar with the forgiveness movement, the project of forgiveness that we've been talking about all year. And one of the key elements of the reason that I have brought it up is that I feel as though we are now ready to undertake the next step in our process that we call awakening. I think too many times, as you've heard me say in the past, we take it for granted that something will come to us or something will just open and happen without our conscious willing of it to happen. Today, as I was going through some of the early lessons of the Course, I came across one that I had completely forgotten about. Lesson number 75. And I'd like to have us take a look at it, because it actually is telling us the same thing, that the time is right now. The lesson is entitled, "The Light Has Come." The light has come. You are healed, and you can heal. The light has come. You are saved, and you can save. You are at peace, and you bring peace with you wherever you go. Darkness and turmoil and death have disappeared. The light has come. Today we celebrate the happy ending to your long dream of disaster. There are no dark dreams now. The light has come. Today, the time of light begins for you and everyone. It is a new era in which a new world is born. The old one has left no trace upon it in its passing. Today, we see a different world because the light has come. You recall this lesson? What did it mean to you? How do you interpret the meaning of the light has come? That it's done, in other words, is what it's telling us, that the dream of sin and disaster is over. And yet most of us, as we go about our day, might have a tendency to question that, huh? What he is broaching to us, I think, is very fundamental in the process of our awakening. What he is saying, very simply, is this: into our consciousness now, right at this moment, there exists a light of truth. You, I, someone else, may not seem individually to feel it, or we may still be in a process of denying it. And yet what he's telling us is that within this consciousness of which we are a part, the light has come. He is saying there is nothing in that consciousness that is not now ready for us to presume all of these other things that you heard me read, that the darkness is over, that there's now no more need for death and disaster. How can you rationally accept that this is true when it doesn't seem to be a part of your experience? Well, there's only one way, actually, that we can. And that is to presume that we are all a part of this consciousness where the light exists. It is to tell us that now, if we are ready, we can adopt an attitude of learning that will help us to exponentially speed the process of letting go. You see, now you no longer need to feel a responsibility for bringing the light into the consciousness. All you need to feel responsible for is your willingness to accept it. It is there, and you can accept it now. Can you think of a good reason not to? Would it be a good reason not to if you later tonight found yourself falling into anger and despair of some nature? Would that be a reason to deny what he's telling us in this lesson? The light has come. It is in you now. Take some moments and feel the impact of that. And then ask how you, in your circumstances, in your life right now, how you can take advantage of that. How you can feel the presence of that light. It is truth that our attitude during our learning process will determine the scope of what we allow ourselves to learn. What I'm saying to you in this particular case is that if you continue your learning process thinking that there's still a lot to be done, a lot to be overcome, that the world isn't quite ready yet for accepting the truth, then that's an attitude, and you will learn within the parameters that attitude allows you to learn. But if you can now settle into a different place and acknowledge an attitude that the light is already present, the truth is present within you now, and you have greatly expanded the parameters within which you can learn. Because now the edges have gone. Time has become irrelevant. Time has become irrelevant. Can you accept that? If you can, in the smallest, most minute degree, if you can begin to acknowledge yourself being a part of this whole, where the light now exists. If you can do that, then feeling the impact of it will be, I'm sure you know, enormously easier. You can become, even without totally accepting what you have just heard this lesson tell us, you can become a part of that light. Simply by believing what it says. And as you become just the smallest sparkle of it, my goodness, look at the impact that you will have. Remember, this whole journey, this path, is to one goal, and that is to accept, to remember our oneness, our unity with our Creator and with all of creation. That's where it's all going. And each time that we find a way to take down one of those natural barriers, to think somebody is different or doing something different, then we've accomplished an enormous amount. So while we are sitting here tonight, we need to reaffirm that there is no one at all, who is not moving step for step with us, with the God Self, to the same goal that we will all arrive at the same moment. How could it not be this way and still have any awareness that we were all a part of one another, that we all shared in the same creative force? Remind yourself of that when you have the opportunity to hold out your hand to someone and take them with you on this path. Not to try to hurry them along on their own or have them catch up, but simply to see that they walk with you. What could you do that would be more loving? If you walked into a dark room, do you stand there wondering how to wire the house when you know where the light switch is? Or do you just walk over and turn on the light? You see, that's what we're saying. As Linda was just pointing out, there's no more need to figure out how to do the wiring diagram. The light is there. It's here. It's with us now. And all we have to do is be willing to open our arms and accept it. Take it in because it's in you now. What a feeling if you can just for a moment grasp the impact of that. And Bill, I must tell you, there's no difference in the feeling I have for the presence of Jesus that I have for your presence. It is the same. It wasn't when it began. I was awestruck. Not now. But I think Linda's point is very well taken. It's not as though we abandon our signs of appreciation, but they do become more of an illustration of our appreciation than a need to help us accomplish something. The difference for me, when I can pray and simply say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, and that's the only thing that comes to my mind, is so different from the way it used to be when I would say, God, please help me see the truth. God, please help me do this, and God, help me do that. All of which were appropriate at the time. But now, the light is here.
But isn't it the Holy Spirit that uses your thoughts to think? So I don't think thought's inherently the bad guy.
No, thought is not inherently bad. It's when we use it to deny, which is what the ego's first inclination is, to use it to deny the truth. But you are absolutely right. When we learn to connect with the God Self, then whether we call it thought or prayer, it all goes to serve the same purpose, doesn't it? Let's touch again, just for a moment, because it is so important and so significant, to try to remind ourselves that everyone is on the path that we are on. Could you see that if you turned on the news and you watched someone doing something that our ego would think was rather fearful, horrific, hateful? Could you still have faith that that one was working to the same goal that you were working toward? If you can't, if that is still difficult for you, then please take some time. Take some time, and in your meditation, ask your God Self to show you. Ask your God Self to reaffirm what His function is. Think of an instance now where someone could do something that you could not see as being able to be used by the Holy Spirit to move that person and you toward the truth. Think of something that would make this rather difficult for you, or if not impossible.
If you had been abused or raped or something,
yes.
that would be real hard to get past.
Okay? Why would it be? This is not a trick question,
No.
but to bring up the things within your perception that would make that difficult, it would be valuable to take a look at. So why would that be?
I was using it as an example.
Okay.
The hurt memory.
Okay? You certainly could allow yourself to retreat into a lot of pain, couldn't you?
Sure.
Well, the reason that I'm asking us to take a look at this, whether we're looking at it specifically or as a general category, we need constantly to remind ourselves of what it is that make all of these fearful things seem so real. And it is because, as Jesus has told us, the first rule of forgiveness has not yet been firmly established, entrenched in our awareness. And what is the first rule of forgiveness? It is to always learn to tell the difference between what is real and what is an illusion. Each time that something traps us into pain, it is associated with the world and with our body and the fear that we are not safe. And all of those things arise because we say that our body and the world are real, that they constitute the definition and description of who we are. And so when something seems to threaten them, then we are threatened. And those things then would be hard to forgive. Brother tells us that the holding of grievances is the thing that makes our world seem to be what it is. When you and I invest our faith and our trust in our perception of being a limited being, a body, in a world, we have lost our ability to forgive. That's the simple truth. you have lost your ability to forgive the moment it is possible for something to happen to you. So can you now begin to see the foundation that must be cultivated in your awareness before this idea of forgiveness becomes a reality? We cannot sit here and even approach our ability to see past the effects of this world, to forgive it, and to lay the foundation for a new world, a real world, as Jesus says the Holy Spirit has for us, as long as this world is real. So you see, we are exposing our attachments, aren't we? The idea of forgiveness seems rather noble, even simple, when you look at it as being the possibility of overlooking something that somebody has done. You could rise to that task, but not for long. No, not for long. Eventually you would succumb to the need to defend yourself from something happening to you. And then the whole concept of forgiveness is lost. Yes?
What if it's not to defend oneself, but to defend a loved one, a child, a son, a daughter?
The truth, my friend, is that you can only condemn or defend yourself. Because you and I are encased in the experience of our own perception. So when I think it is my child that I would be defending, what I am literally defending is my right to be a victim myself.
Your fear of being a victim?
Can you begin to see that? If we each experience the world as a mirror for our thoughts, then what is the best way that I can teach my child to be free? It is to teach him to be defenseless to his loving self. Because then the world that he sees can only mirror back to him the images of that loving self. But if I teach him, or if I feel as though I must defend him, then I have set him up to experience something in the world from which he must defend himself. Again, it becomes the simplest of all things to understand and the most difficult to understand. And that is that the world I see is simply a dream, a figment of my imagination, because the thoughts that I am experiencing are thoughts that are untrue. And that makes the world an untrue place.
What if something happened that you haven't even thought of? It just boom, out of the blue.
And it can't happen, honey. Sorry, it can't happen.
Well, it happened to me.
No, I'm sorry, it can't. Thought precedes every experience, physically. Without a thought, there is no physical experience. In that moment, it is thought within you that you are experiencing, because the world is not a physical place.
I've never thought what something that just
You may not recognize the form of it, honey,
Okay.
but the purpose that it served for you, the belief that was being expressed, was very clearly yours, or you could not experience what has happened. I understand that, but what I'm trying to say to you is the first thing you have to grasp is that the world is not a physical place. This is not sticks and stones. These are thoughts.
Assuming that's correct, how do I undo it?
How do you undo it?
Yeah.
That's what we've been talking about all these years, isn't it?
What was that?
It is the process of learning to change your mind. It is the process of learning for you to learn that this image that you have made of yourself, from which all of these seeming strange thoughts arise, is an untrue image, and that you can make another one. You can make another one in the presence of and with the help of your God self. Not of your own volition, only in the presence of your God self. The part of you existing now in your mind, the part of you that is not confused, the part of you that does know that you are not a physical being, the part of you that knows that the idea of sin, of fear, of guilt are just imaginings, that's all. But we have made them real, and we have made them into a world, a physical place. Because that world then becomes the opportunity for us to hide. For us to hide from our beliefs. We try to make another world instead of accepting the world that God has made, because we are afraid that in God's world we are going to be judged. It's the old story of the Garden of Eden, of being sinful and losing God's love. That's the myth that our perception in our world is based upon. And that is what the Course is trying to teach us. How to let that image go and to accept the image that the Holy Spirit or the God Self holds for us, which is the image of our creation. So you see, this whole business of forgiveness is not quite as perhaps simple as we thought, is it? It requires more than just the willingness to overlook. It requires you to examine this self that you have made and to ask yourself whether or not you are willing to accept a self without a body, to accept a self that maybe you don't think you can identify now. Are you? Are you willing to take a shot at it? Thank you. Thank you. There is something so beautiful about you, but you cannot see it in this world. You cannot see it with the body's eyes.
It's the direction in which you look. Are you looking
out or in?
There.
Yes.
I've heard you for years talk about, the way we parent is not to pass on our fear, or not to teach the defenses against fear. And at the beginning of this visit too, I was hearing it, and now being a parent, it's kind of it's here to practice.
You've done your work. That's why it's possible. That's why this now can happen for you. Because you've laid the new foundation. You can go there. Hang on just a second. It helps to remember, to remind yourself in front of all of this, that this child that we claim as our child is not our child. This is God's child. And who are you? You are not the child of your parent. You are God's child. And if you would like to be defended, then rest in the defenses of God, which are to be completely defenseless. To know that you are totally loved, and that you can't be touched by anything that you have made in your imagination.
It's like teenagers that are going off to party and the parent just saying, I know my kids are going to make the right decision and they're going to be safe, and I've seen this happen with friends of mine's children, and you can either go into it worried and create the worry, or else you can go in and know that they're completely safe. And
You can, honey, and that's the way it begins. That's how the mind set, the attitude begins. But then you want to follow that deeper and see why it's true. You want to really understand that you are safe because there isn't anything about you that is subject to the rules, to the laws of the world.
right.
Have you ever paused for a moment to really contemplate, those of you who study A Course in Miracles, to really contemplate what this place that he calls the real world can be like? He tells us in the most simple way that it will be a place where we expect love to be the mirror into which we look. Okay? And this world happens to be the mirror of fear, because it is based upon guilt, separation. So when we look into the mirror of this world, what do we see? But a need to defend, huh? Yes. But can you imagine what it would be like everywhere you went tomorrow to expect that what you looked at would reflect back to you the face of love? Just for a moment contemplate the enormity of that. This is where we're going. This is the world that we are now laying a foundation in our awareness to accept. But to do that, to make it possible, we have to be willing to let this one go. The real world is not a better version of this one.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful, my friend, because you see the beauty there. You are beautiful because I see the beauty in you. So this world we're talking about, this potential of a world that reflects back only love to us, it's got to begin by changing the image that you now see and think is who you are. And that's the whole process that we're calling forgiveness. It's the whole process that we're calling forgiveness. Learning to see past all of the images that we have made, to make another image of a loving, joyful being. But we can't do that. By ourselves, we cannot do that. But in our willingness, we can accept the presence that God placed in our mind for that very purpose. Relationships are probably the thing that we most misunderstand. We think of a special relationship as someone that we love especially. That's usually the category that we put a special relationship in. The truth is that this is a person that we set aside to be the receptacle, so to speak, of all of our most intimate projections. This person, as you just pointed out, John, in addition to being one that we pretend that we can love the most, is also the first one that we can hate the most. When they seem to turn against us, when they seem not to fulfill the obligation that our making them special has endowed them with. Sorry.
They create the biggest lessons to learn. They're the mirrors.
They certainly do.
They're teaching tools.
They certainly do, because they are the one in whom we see all of our greatest weaknesses. I can speak to a concept of my believing that there's some purpose served in death for me. What the Course teaches us is that as we learn to release the values that we have placed on sin and guilt, the idea of pain and death will disappear. It's not so much coming to love the dark side as it is to recognize there is no purpose for the dark side, that only the light in truth can exist, and that anything that I have made up that seems to smack of the dark side is simply my ego's way of trying to confine me to an experience of a self that isn't truth.
Right, but not so much the dark side as just the death.
Well, most of the places that I've read death is the kind of the epitome of the dark side.
Okay. For me, it's like a diaphanous step into the next.
If I could see that there were no place that I needed to go, no process I needed to go through to transition from a body to no body, from enlightenment to something else, that I am now everything that I ever can be, then all of those concepts just become concepts.
And then those go.
And then those go. They all must go. Because any concept that I might employ can only diminish the reality of my being. Any concept must do that. When we talk about seeing, we are talking about an awareness of the mind. That's all that seeing is. Only when there appears to be something external that relates to my body is seeing connected to my eyes. Had an interesting experience just a couple of days ago. A good friend of ours just experienced the loss of her husband. And she was very distraught because she felt that before he died, in fact, for many, many years, she has tried to share with him her awareness that there is no real death. That it's only the body that goes through a transition that the mind thinks is necessary. But somehow she got caught up in the guilt of feeling as though perhaps she didn't do a good enough job, and therefore when he passed, and he seemed to pass without having accepted the awareness of himself, then it began to play upon her mind that perhaps something had happened, that just because he hadn't accepted it, that he could have experienced something. And I was wondering, I was asking the Holy Spirit what to say to her. And while I was in that process, the image of him came to my mind. And I could see him being in a very different state a very different state of mind than the one that he was in at the time before he made the transition from his body. And I could see that he, whereas before he had professed that there was no life, so-called life after death, that he was going through the awareness of understanding that that was incorrect. That he did, in this place now, see himself, understand, and recognize himself, so he knew that there was a him after this thing that he had called death. So it was a lovely experience to be able to connect with that and be able to reassure her that no matter what our belief is, we don't change the truth. Just because I think I can die doesn't mean that I can. And I think that's very helpful for us to remember, to help others remember as well, because that can be a very devastating thing. Death can be a very devastating concept. But it's just another aspect of learning to distinguish between what is true and what is untrue. Can you see how important this is? Can you see how all of our dilemmas rest upon that? How many of us would have a dilemma of any kind if we truly knew that there was nothing in this world that could touch us? Nothing. We are simply here having an experience of a belief. But the belief isn't correct. We can change it. But the belief itself, the experience itself, means nothing. You know, the real dichotomy of all of this self that you think you are, that's sitting here experiencing being a body and so forth, your real self, it isn't here. You are not here in a world going through this experience. He tells us the closest way we can come to understanding what that means and recognize the impact of it is to think of it as being a dream. That we are in the place of truth, in the heart of God, whatever you'd like to describe it, dreaming this dream of being a body in a world. But we are not here. There's nothing of you here that can be touched in any way. As the statement John made was that during this time of Easter, of thinking of dying and being resurrected, those are all concepts that apply only to our body. And the way we need to think of it more truthfully is, what is the mind going through? What is the metamorphosis, if I may use that word, of the mind that is using the symbolism of a body dying and coming back to life? Well, it is simply to firmly implant in our awareness the idea that there is no death, that there is only an infinite being to be expressed and to be experienced. There is no death. And obviously then, we must know that if there is no death, there is no body. There is no body. There is no world. This is from Lesson 73. Idle wishes and grievances are partners or co-makers in picturing the world you see. The wishes of the ego give rise to it, and the ego's need for grievances, which are necessary to maintain it, peoples it with figures that seem to attack you and call for righteous judgment. These figures become the middlemen the ego employs to traffic in grievances. They stand between your awareness and your brother's reality, and beholding them, you do not know your brother or yourself. Well, shoot, let's let him go. Huh? Why not? I don't think they're making us happy. I really don't. I think we've been barking up the wrong tree all this time. The awakening that we're talking about, this awakening that you and I, each of us, will experience together. It is not going to be a matter of Jesus or Buddha or you or me passing one another up by knowing more, understanding more. It's not what it is, my friend. We are different parts of the same whole, whether you give it the name of Jesus or Buddha or Sean. We are different parts of the same whole. And in that whole, there is an idea, a belief, that whole is in the process of letting go. And it will seem like you let go of your parts, and Suzanne and I and Jesus and whoever else, letting go of all of their parts. That's not what it is. It is a one consciousness, a single whole consciousness that is in the process of changing its belief. And whether someone, part of it, seems to have gone on and is in a place we call heaven, or another one is in a place we call a real world, these are all concepts that are still part and parcel of the idea called sin and separation. They're all concepts. They're all parts of the dream that we are dreaming together.
So
we will awaken.
The point is not to stop the dream.
Pardon me?
The point is not to stop the dream.
The point is to stop the dreaming, yes. And we will stop.
We do it together.
We will do it together. That's the point.
Which means you have to wait for the people that are dragging their feet.
Nobody's dragging their feet. You see? Everybody's moving toward the same goal in a different way. Everybody.
And haven't you said before that it's all over anyway, and that it's just a recollection?
That's what he's told us. That the instant, it's just like saying the light has come. The light is in our consciousness. That the instant we heard God laugh when the silly mad idea entered the mind of the Son of God, that it was done. But we're now processing the fact that it's done. But however, whatever that means to us, the important thing is for us to all remember that this is something we are engaged in together, as one. It can only be that, I'm sorry, Sam, yes.
No matter what state of being we're in.
There's only one state of being. That incidentally is the primary reason that he tells us in the Course, not to get yourself lost in thinking of there being, what's the word he uses? Levels, thank you. Levels of awareness or levels of unawareness. No, we are either asleep or awake. We went to sleep as one, we will awaken as one. These are just different ways to look at being separate, and they're all going to go away. The ego doesn't ask what it would be like to be loved. Understand that. It is not within the purview of the ego's perception to even suspect that it can be loved. Okay? That's a given. So, when the ego looks at the world, it doesn't know that there is an alternative to hate and fear. It just recognizes that as being normal. So the first step in changing, in having an expectation, let's say, that love can be found, is in changing your mind about whether or not you deserve to have it. And this is the purpose, the beginning purpose of forgiveness. We've talked before about how forgiveness is an evolutionary type thing. It changes as you take it from step to step. But as you first begin with it, forgiveness shows you that if you forgive, if you overlook something, this is not the definition we all go with now, but in the beginning, if you overlook something that someone has done with the intention of loving them regardless, something opens up about your own, an insight into your own self-image. And you suddenly get the idea, my goodness, it is possible for me to be loved. And that's how it all begins. Then the next step, the meaning of it changes even further and further and further until finally, the last movement of forgiveness is when we recognize there was nothing there to forgive. But it's all about learning that we can be loved. It's that simple. And we've said this many times too, but what is the one thing upon which we can all agree? That we want to be loved. No matter what. Everyone wants to be loved.
So isn't the way we experience that most clearly, I guess you would say, is to be loving? You can't be loved without being loving.
That's what we learn. That's how it evolves.
You have to, giving and receiving are the same as that law.
Yes. You always then come to the conclusion that the only thing that has ever kept you from being loved, feeling loved, is your lack of willingness to be loved. And as you give it, you overcome that. That it was becoming something else. We would be more open and willing to receive that something else as it came. And you look at the world and see the chaos and the hatred and the killing. Oh, can you look at what's happening in Syria and say to yourself, we are coming to a place of peace. Can you see the turmoil being just the ego's need to be certain that it can be willing to accept peace? You see, if we can, then that's what we can communicate to all of those who are still mired in the deepest of conflict. When she says thank you, when she says you have helped me change my life, don't say you don't deserve it, but accept it. Because that's how our consciousness changes. To say I don't deserve it just continues to value guilt, and nothing really has let go. The consciousness hasn't moved much, but to say, yes, I have.
Did I say I don't deserve it?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I guess I would say that she's been very easy to love, and I've been happy to hold this image and, accept that she needs to have this image of us, so that's fine. I'm glad to extend that to her. that okay? No.
Sometimes it's a measure of how willing we are to be able to open ourselves and say, when someone extends us love and say, yeah, I really do deserve that. I do deserve to feel their love. I mean, isn't that what we're really after? Wanting to be loved. What a nice feeling. Rather than say, well, I don't know, no, I don't deserve that. Our son was just here visiting. And he and I were sitting out on the deck, and we've had some issues. I had some issues when he was growing up because I didn't accept myself, and I know that. So I just like to take whatever opportunities I have to try to express something different to him. And I said, you know, I don't know how many times you're aware that just throughout the day I think of you, and I'm grateful that you have become the loving father and beautiful being that you are. Oh, well, he said, I don't. I said, Mark. He looked at me and I said, I really do love you. And he took it. He accepted it. And that was such a wonderful feeling. Say to a group of friends, I am wholly loved. I have done nothing wrong. I am the perfect child of God. Just being able to do that, to acknowledge that, is so important for us because this is what all of our teaching is aimed toward, being willing to accept that that's true. And yet, most of us are still in such firm denial that it's true, that we could receive that 100 times a day and it would just go nowhere. So how important it is to be willing to just simply acknowledge, yes, I am. I am the whole child of God, perfectly loved.
Do you need to say that out loud?
I don't know, do I? I can't. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule for any of us. I think if I felt it, I wouldn't resist saying it out loud. Why would I?
That's like looking in the mirror at yourself and looking into your face, into your eyes, and saying, I love you.
These aren't easy things for us to do, are they, Teddy?
No.
No, they're not.
But maybe.
A lot of resistance around it. Just afraid that the other person isn't going to accept it and you're going to feel like an idiot, that sort of thing. So
maybe it's us that doesn't feel
right.
as though we can accept it. Huh?
Yeah.
One of the things I have learned, Mac, is that I have never been in a situation where I didn't accept something as true and have somebody else reject it. The mirror is always perfectly clear. It's always feeding me back what I already believe.
If you felt that, would you have a need to say it?
Well, if I felt that, I wouldn't. But if any of us felt that, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about learning either, would we? We would know it. So everything we talk about is what best facilitates the transcendence of our ignorance and the acceptance of what is true. Course teaches us that one of the most fundamental things we have to learn is that all stories are the same. Otherwise, we are constantly distracted by how unique a way someone has found to tell the story of sin and separation. They're all the same. Whether someone seems to be dying or someone seems to have a minor upset, all of the stories are the same. They have one cause, and there is one thing that heals all of them. We have a problem with that?
You mean separation and joining?
Yes.
So what would be the difference between a story and a poem?
Stories are the form.
But are not the forms different?
The forms and the stories are all different.
Oh, I understand.
But they're all the same.
I didn't misunderstand you. I just didn't understand you.
That's great.
There's a difference.
It's like the old saying, same difference.
See, we can say they're all the same because they all result in the same outcome.
Which is something is wrong with me.
So, we treat them all the same. Remember how difficult it was for me when I first heard Brother say to me that he couldn't go anywhere without me. Because my perception of him was so totally different. That he would have already moved into this magic awakening and so forth. And what he was really saying is, we are one. And where one of us goes, the other one must be.
Can imagination and true guidance be the same and from the same source?
I think that depends a lot, honey, on where you think your imagination comes from and what the imagination really seems to be. The imagination that would come from the ego is always going to be to imagine the worst. But there is a different kind of imagination. One that allows you to envision something coming from a different place. And while you may not, let's say, have the conscious experience to support it, that kind of imagination is not really imagination, because it comes from your place of knowing.
Okay.
And the difference is just whether or not you intended to come from ego or intended to come from the God self. I think the thing that perhaps you were really asking was whether or not you can trust the feelings that and the information, the guidance that's coming from that place where you're experiencing it. Or is that your imagination? If it is your ego's guidance, you won't feel good for long.
Okay.
Because the ego guidance is always coming from a place where there's something wrong. So very soon, that feeling will emerge, that there is something wrong. But if you stay in there with a nice, peaceful sense, that's not coming from your ego. And you can trust it.
But you know, I've had to let go. I've had to just give him to God, and whatever will be, will be. I can't, you know. I love the boy, and I just will send love, and I don't know what else to do. You know? I know who he is, but he doesn't know who he is. It's like so.
When you give him to God, honey, do it with a light heart. Many times we surrender something to God because we've reached our wits' end. And it's a last-ditch thing. We don't know anything else to do, so we give them to God. And the feeling that leaves you is not going to be helpful. But when you give him to God knowing that he has never left God,
right, yeah,
it can leave you with a very peaceful awareness, and that is what you will communicate to him. Now we're doing 17. I think when I was laying out this book, because of the work that I had done predominantly the work that I'd done in the prison in Kauai, this chapter was the one that I knew potentially would be the most controversial. And I tried not to be as brutally forthcoming as I really felt about it. And yet, I wanted to put enough of how I felt here that could convey the feeling of how much I think we need to revise our entire system of justice. So I just say that because there may be times when, as we go through here, I may interpret something for you a little more deeply than what it seems to mean on the surface here. How do you feel when you hear that? When you hear this statement, there are bad people out there doing evil things. Does that sound right to you? Is it necessary for us to have a jail? A penal system? Probably for a while. Yeah. Not so much as it may strike you for the benefit of protecting the innocent, but of letting people who think so poorly of themselves have the opportunity to be protected from themselves. This is very, very obvious when you look at who's in prison today. That almost everyone who is there, one way or another, has a drug-related issue. And when you look at what turns people on to drugs, it becomes very plain that what they need for a moment, is a system of taking them away from their own sense of bad habits, their own sense of self-punishment. I used to always begin my conversation with the guys by saying, just so we don't have any misunderstandings, I want to be very clear why I'm here. I'm here for one reason and one reason only. I'm here to tell you that there's nothing wrong with you. That concept is so foreign that it would take 2 or 3 minutes while they even processed it just to begin to feel what I meant. And then somebody would laugh and say, then what the hell are we doing here? You're here because you think there's something wrong with you. And we can change that. But if you're here because there's something wrong with you, that issue is going to appear to be outside your control. But if it's only because you think there's something wrong with you, we can handle that. The ultimate thing that we need to understand about our system of justice, that it's there not to punish the guilty, but to prove to us that our guilt is real.
Would you like to explain that a little more?
Why do we judge anyone? It's always a projection of how we feel about ourselves. So, if I need you to be guilty, guess what? It's to validate my belief that I'm guilty. So I need the prisons, I need the perpetrators, the victimizers, to prove to me that I should be a victim because my guilt is less than yours.
I should be a victim.
I must have, and that's why I phrased it the way I did. It unequivocally asserts our right to be a victim.
In other words, we are innocent, and they
We're
are
not
guilty.
innocent. No, forgive me, honey. The ego never feels that it's innocent, but it always feels it is less guilty than the next person. In other words, it finds that, uses that as a means to justify being alive and still being guilty.
Oh, it's quite subtle. Mm-hmm.
Being alive and still being guilty. Because the ultimate reason that we experience death is that is the price of guilt. Otherwise, there would be no purpose in dying. There would be no purpose in the body being sick, having an accident. None of that would be necessary were it not the price of being guilty. Another statement I used to say to the guys was, I would tell them that I had discovered a perfect way to let them all be free. That what we needed to do instead were to put all the victims in jail. What would be the difference? Knowing what you know, what would be the difference? Knowing what we know, there is no difference.
Yeah.
Because the only reason we have judged someone and put them in prison is because we feel guilty ourselves. What I say is that if I forgave myself, there would be no one who could attack me. If I truly let go of any need to be judged, I could not be judged. So how do we solve the problem? It's what Jesus tells us in the Course about every other paragraph. It's called forgiveness. Forgive the need to judge. Relinquish the judgments that we have made in the past. And let ourselves begin, or become open, let's say, to the possibility of being innocent, of being totally, utterly relieved from any story we have ever told. It's never about the one you think you judge. And whether you see yourself on the victim or the victimizer side of the coin, the story is always the same. Because the outcome is exactly the same. Whether you're a victimizer or a victim, the outcome is exactly the same. The whole idea, again, is we are so firmly convinced that what we need to do is to change the world, to judge the world, to make the world pay for what it has done to us. And it's only just now, well, the last perhaps 100 years, that we are beginning to finally recognize that doesn't work.